Hello, good morning, and good afternoon, whatever time it may be. It's been a little while because of some scheduling. I think this was a 2 week break between this and my last broadcast. So I hope in that time that everyone figured out all your problems and we're all fine now. There's no problems at all, uh, which would be wonderful. That being said, today we are going to have a second part to the last session. But before we get into that, first off, hello, Ariadne. Thank you for chiming in. I always like to know that there's at least one person in the stream. So thank you very much. And anybody else there, if you want to say hello too, that would make me feel great. If not, and you want to be shy and quiet, which is the way I normally am in presentations, that's fine as well. Um, Before we get into the technical part, I like to share some personal stuff before we get all nerdy and techie. Something totally not important, but that made me very happy about a week or so ago. Uh, as you know, I am somewhat of a Star Wars fan, as you can kind of tell by all the crap behind me. But I also collect other toys as well. And for the last year or so, I've been into GI Joe toys. I was a fan of those when I was a kid, a long, long, long time ago. But I've been picking up some action figures lately and a couple of crafts. Um, and this show directions. That's a GI Joe toy right there that I'm pointing to on screen. But anyway, there's one thing that I wanted for a very long time that's been hard to get, and that is Serpentor. Now, GI Joe is completely ridiculous. There's nothing sensible in that show at all. It's just pure dumb fun. But Serpentor as a bad guy is like completely dumb. There's nothing rational about this character and the way this character looks, just completely out there. Hasbro has a Serpentor action figure that I've wanted for a while. And thank you to all the people chiming in and saying, "Hey, I appreciate that." Anyway, Hasbro has this action figure that for Serpentor, as soon as it goes on sale, it sells out instantly. There's no way to get it. And I've been bummed about it because I really want it. So, not this past Saturday, the week before, my wife and I went to a toy store in town, one I've been meaning to go to for a long time. We finally made time, and I'm in there in 5 minutes, and I find not the precise Hasbro one I wanted, but instead I got this. And again, this is my warning. Ridiculous. I mean, not that a Star Destroyer or a Stormtrooper makes much sense, but this is going to blow that away. So this is the statuette I got of Serpentor, and it makes me very happy, even though it is completely. I mean, look at that. That is just there's no redeeming qualities about that at all, except that it makes me really, really happy. All right, so that was my personal stuff. Now we're going to talk tech, specifically. We're going to talk about PWAs, progressive web apps. That was a topic of conversation for last week, or I should say, last session. And I think we're on our seventh episode. I really don't know until I post to YouTube and I see the numbers, but um, in that last session, I talked kind of high level about PWAs, about what they mean, what they imply. And you can see my thought I felt something weird. Oh, I can hear better now. That was actually my hearing aid popping out of my ear. Got new hearing aids. I think I mentioned that last time, and I'm still kind of getting used to the form factor. Anyway, boy, I sound really loud now. Uh, Talked about PWA at a high level. Talked about this idea that PWA is a term that came about maybe 10 or so years ago, and gradually has come to mean a couple of core components, a couple main things. But it is just a term. It's like an agreed upon industry term, and it refers to a website that is mobile friendly, is installable, which means an application manifest, and also has offline support, typically via a service worker. One of the things I talked about in that last session was how, for a while, I feel like PWA as a term was everywhere. I know I was giving presentations on PWAs at like every conference I went to. Like that was the topic, and I feel like that's a lot less now. And I think one of the main reasons is that a lot of it is just kind of expected. You will have mobile support. I mean, it's in 2024. To not be mobile friendly just makes no sense at all. um, I know on my personal blog, mobile is still less than half, but I think in pretty much every single other website, it's like more than half. And application manifests is just a small, easy thing to do that most people just do it. And service workers, maybe not quite so much, but I feel like it's kind of moving into the expected realm of these are just things that you do to a website. That being said, I still think it's a topic worthy of conversation. It's all things that make your web app better, which is a good thing. And it's also things that you can adopt in small parts. So in the last session, we only got about halfway through, but we absolutely made our simple application a little bit better on the way to doing it. So my plan today is to continue. I'm going to switch to code view in a second. If you have any questions, let me know. We're going to review what we did last time and then kind of build on from that. So let me shift some windows around. Still not a professional streamer yet. Where is it? There. Oh God, no, not that. That's the window I was going for. And let's switch to the HTML file. All right, I have made this quite big. But for those of you in the room, if you can't read the text, let me know and I'll make it even bigger. The web page or the app that I had built was one that used the dad joke API. This is a free API that returns dad jokes like what do you call dictionary on drugs, high definition, and it had a button that you could click to load a new one. And I'm not even sure if you can see that on the stream because it loads so darn quick. Uh, it's like almost instantaneous. So this was the initial thing that we built, and I'll show you some of the HTML behind it. I had a div for the joke, a div for the button, and then a little bit of JavaScript over here to handle calling the API. So that's how we started. The first thing I did actually was just to show that it was okay on mobile. We can go in DevTools and turn on the mobile emulator. And we will say iPhone 14. And that is absolutely readable. It could be a little bit better on mobile. But, if I'm building an app to quickly get a joke for my kids, this works just fine. So we were okay with that. I'll turn that off so I have more space. The first thing we did was to add a application manifest file. That is how we begin the process of making the application install better on a mobile device. There was two steps to that. First is to go into our HTML and add a link to it. You don't have to call it manifest.json, but that's typically what people do. The important thing is to have that rel equals manifest. And this tells the browser that this is where the application manifest lives. And this is how, when the application is added to the desktop, either on your mobile phone or on your Windows or Mac desktop, this controls the behavior. That JSON file, and we looked this up last time in the Mozilla Dev Network. We got that as kind of a default. Is a couple short properties, and some are optional, some are not. But you see on top here, name and short name. Name is what you're going to see on your mobile phone. Short name is what you're going to see uh, if space is a bit limited. Start URL is going to essentially tell you where it should begin. And honestly, I can't remember if that should be a full domain or not. I believe it picks it up from the uh, current domain of the site itself. And display is going to change how, when the user on their phone clicks to open it, it's going to define if it looks like a regular web page or if it hides some of that and acts more like an application. Minimal UI is the one I picked for that purpose. And by the way, so I don't have all that in my brain at all. I go to MDN application manifest. I could type and drop in there. And this is where I pick that stuff up. And see, there's a lot more in here as well. Uh, some of these will be required and some won't. The big one was the icons. And you could see I have it minimized here. So uh, you should provide a custom icon. Otherwise, it's going to use the browser's icon instead. You should provide an icon, and you need to provide one for different form factors, so different phone resolutions, Retina or not. Although I think everything now would be considered Retina. It's essentially a process that I don't think about because there's websites that will allow you to say, "Here's my icon." Just spit everything out and give them the JSON. Live in the last meeting, we found one on a Microsoft site, and it generated 449 lines of JSON of icons, which is just ridiculous. And you could see it had ones for Windows 11. And again, I will probably repeat this. PWA is not just mobile. You can install web apps on your desktop machine. But you see, it has a bunch for Windows 11, which probably is way overkill. I don't see needing 20 or 30 icons for Windows 11. And then we get to Android and then to iOS and different sizes, etc. So yeah, this is stupid. It's not stupid. It works, but it's way more than I normally do. And in fact, let me show you my application manifest for raymondcamden.com. I believe it's manifest.json. And yeah, I had 3 icons. So I probably need a little bit more than that. Uh, but it's good enough. But this also shows you an example of how this would look in the real world, and this is for my blog, and brings up another thing that I like to remind people when building PWAs, and that is it doesn't have to be a single page application. The one that we're working with here, the little dad joke thing, that is the very definition of a single page application. But all of these things we're talking about can also work in a traditional multi-page application or, a regular website like a blog. I will note that start URL is a full URL, so I may have done that wrong. Well, let's actually look at the docs and see what it says. Start URL, the preferred URL that should be loaded when the user launches the web app, although it's purely advisory. So if we go back to ours, this should be the full URL. I am working locally, so it's probably not that big of an issue yet. But eventually, I would like to deploy this live, maybe under Netlify, under some particular subdomain, and I may change it there. So, long-winded way of saying that's where we were last time. The other thing I want to point out is that when I was testing with y'all, we went into DevTools and under application and manifest was picked automatically. Your DevTools actually do a real good job of telling you things. When we worked last time, we had errors that we fixed as we went on. Now we only have warnings that we can go that we can just ignore. By the way, richer PWA install UI, and this is something I mentioned last time, is that Chrome is testing a way to make the installation of PWAs a bit more rich, a bit more informational. So it's not just I'm an app, install me, but talking more about it. But again, this is warnings, so I am just going to ignore the heck out of that. But we could see here it picked up the names, picked up our start URL, our display, and those are all the icons. I picked like a happy face type thing. But, and again, normally you would not have all of these freaking icons. Yeah, that is just way, way too many. So that's where we are now. First thing I want to do is something actually not related to the PWA at all, per se, but I really want to put this button to the bottom of my screen. And I knew how to center it. And if we look at the CSS, joke button container, I gave it a margin, I gave it a text alignment, but I really want it at the bottom. So I'm gonna try to guess. I'm probably gonna fail. Position absolute and bottom minus no 10px. I'm just totally guessing here. We'll take a look at it, and holy crap, that worked. I am shocked. Now, of course, we lost the centering. Um, Left 50%, right 50%. I feel like that's going to do nothing. Oh my god. Okay, I am welcome to the CSS live streaming show. Um, there's probably a nicer way of doing that, but I'm going to reopen DevTools, make that a bit smaller. We're going to turn on device emulation again and just see. Oh, reload, please center. Oh, that didn't work. See, I got cocky there. I was like, oh, this is going to work. So because it didn't work, I will go to Google because this browser profile is still on Bing and say center. No, uh, put button at bottom. That's nice and vague. Using CSS to align a button bottom of the screen. Stack Overflow is always correct, except all the cookies and position bottom. Yeah, and center. Oh, just left. Well, I was close to place a button in the center of screen. Let's just try getting rid of the right, save it, and see what happens. Nope, wrong window. And reload. Nope, that's still not good. And by the way, if I'll tab too quick, y'all let me know. The below, keep the button at the bottom of the page and this looks like it, right? Now, of course, I'm doing it on the div, not the button, and that could be the issue. And so for the heck of it, look at our HTML here. I have this div, I have this button, height, width. What if we applied it to just the button and not the div? So these two declarations are repeating each other. Well, not repeating each other. They're pointing to the same thing. But if we go back here and reload, no, that's not it. Left 50% margin. Who knew that in 2024 this would be such an issue? Joke button container button. Let's think. If that's not it, let's put this back on the div and do what I normally do when these things fail. Confirm it still fail. All right. and go to the second result. Positioning a button on the bottom of the screen, CSS. I mean, of course, we have that problem solved. It's just centering the darn thing. How do I add a comment in CSS? No, position the bottom at the bottom. Yeah. We have position absolute and we have the bottom. It's just we're not getting that div centered. So I'm going to do this. We're going to see what happens when we do that. I'll scroll that down. Add additional to the left 50%. Ariadne. Oh, let me just show that instead of just saying it out loud. All right, Ariadne, we're going to try that. And she said additional to. By the way, I have a huge amount of respect for CSS. So my struggling here, that's all on me. I completely acknowledge that. That's not on any lack of CSS. And oh my goodness, look at that. Let's reload. And let's turn responsive off because it's adding those. And look at that. So I think now we need just to lift up that bottom a little bit. Although it's a little bit tight there. Let's see. If we move up that bottom, let's make it 50 because that button is pretty thick. It's moving up. I don't know if you saw that. It shifted up. I could probably make that button a little bit smaller too. And make it a little bit higher. Let's go for 75, 79, 75. All right. So, Ariadne, since you helped me, what would you say for getting the button to be a little bit more over? I still worry that it's the containing div, although it's only as wide as the button. Additional to the left. Any other ideas for getting it over? It's almost perfect. It's just not really centered. I think I'm almost tempted just to make the darn thing take left off of containing. All right, Sue, show. Sue is saying take transform off button. Oh, take transform off the button. Add margin. Okay, so take left off containing div. All right. And by the way, I trust you, Sue, but I'm also going to do it one at a time just to see. All right. We took the left off. Add margin auto to the button. Let me show her stuff. Margin auto to the button. Margin auto. And okay. You may need to make the button display back again. All right. Take transform off, but yeah, the transform is currently on the div surrounding it. How many developers does it take to center a button? Let's see. By the way, I have my chat on the right here. That's what I'm looking at in case you're curious. Take transform off container. All right. And again, we'll look at it real quick. All right. Still not centered. I'm not too worried about it being a little bit lower. Put transform and left on the button. Okay, let me comb saw like that. Oh, and should the position be on the button now? Let's just see what we have here. Still not good. Put transform and put transform and left. So that was left 50%, I believe. Oh. Take trans. Listen, y'all, Sue and Ariadne, y'all need to get together. Also position absolute. All right. Should I take it off the div then? Or just heck, even get rid of the div? Margin auto should center the button. All right. So, what are we thinking about this, y'all? Margin auto, we're still off a little bit. I'm gonna save. All right. Margin auto. Yeah, we're still not good. Again, though, vertically, I'm not worried about. Like once we get it centered, I can shift it up a little bit. Put width equals 100%. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. All right. I'm gonna get rid of that margin for now too, just to kind of simplify. So width 100% and position absolute. Yeah, we got that on the joke button. See where we are now. Oh, again, it's like it's off. It's center-ish. So close. Yeah, we got position absolute on the button. We have the transform on the button. We have margin auto. We have a left at 25%. And we have 100% width on the containing div. Do you have any overflow on the page? I don't believe so. Let me just reload it for the heck of it and continue to make that a little bit higher. Oops. There we go. Now we could see it a little better. Remove left 25%. Now, when you say remove left 25%, let me hide that button. Are you saying remove left 50% or change the 50% to 25%? Get rid of it. Sorry, remove that. That's all right. This is web development by committee. We're getting there. And remove that from the container. Let's try. By the way, one little hack I do when I'm not sure if I'm going to need to bring something back, I give it an invalid CSS name. That way, if I realize I made a mistake, I could bring it back. Yeah, when that now that lost the. Of course, with this being position bottom, I can move that down there. Oh, look at that! It's so close. It's so close. Uh, Still slightly off-centered. And let's go down to our dev tools, make sure. That's weird how that div is. I'm really tempted to remove that div and use display block. Remove the transform. All right. Again, I trust you and we'll rename it. Ooh, that shifted over. I have to remember that y'all are maybe a couple seconds behind on the stream, and I'm seeing the comments come in and testing stuff. I need to slow down just a little bit. Uh, so now we have it over here. You know what? Actually, we could fiddle right in here. Yeah, transform is invalid. Position margin absolute. Width height. Yep, Sue, you and I are on the same vibe here. Yeah, instead of going back and forth. Now, of course, the big thing is that we got to make sure whatever we edit here, we put back in code. But I am still kind of tempted to maybe remove that. By the way, another little hack I do: background color yellow to help me visualize like where this even is. And apparently, it's nowhere. Let's get back to the container should be positioned absolutely. All right, if we change that position ab, and then we lose the button completely. I am I am gonna punt on this. This feels crazy. Position, position app, position the bottom. You know what? I think I do want to get rid of the div. think I want to get rid of the div. And again, I'm going to comment it out in case I change my mind. And then we only have joke button. It's not doing a transform anymore because we commented that out. That just does the button. I do think we need display block. This is the last thing I'm going to do. And that's actually darn close to getting there. And actually, you know what? Let's go into the button and see what happens if we transform. And yeah, it's still off. All right. Got multiple people saying let's not worry about that anymore. This is what I'm going to do. I want to make sure it's there. I am going to get rid of position. I'm going to give it a margin on top just so we have some space so we can see it. And in theory, there we go. All right. And Sue promised me a code pin, and we'll get to that later. But let's go back in here and reload. And we have it centered at least. I will take that. Although I think I think we started with that, but that is okay. So, oh yeah, and or grid. Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to say or grid. Yeah, I like CSS grid. Um, I have not used it for positioning at the bottom yet, but I bet that would do it as well. All right, so I mentioned that there were three aspects that we needed to worry about. First being mobile support, and we have that working. It's good enough on a mobile device. We have the application manifest, and that's going to control what happens when we install it. If we want the browser itself to say, "Hey, you can install me," then we need to add the service worker. So, and as an example, by the way, of how that works, if we go to my game, boom, right there. I hope y'all saw that because Edge hit it kind of quickly. Let's reload here and see if it shows it again. Yeah, it's okay. It's not being annoying. But up here in the URL toolbar, which unfortunately I can't make bigger with zooming in and all that, it actually prompted me to install and it went away. So that little icon right there would let me install this particular web app as a application on my desktop, and the same thing would happen on mobile as well. And this is what we're aiming to do for our joke app. And that last part that we are missing is the service worker. Now, the service worker is incredibly complex, or it can be, um, but it's also really, really powerful because what the service worker does, one of the things it does, and the primary thing that's known for, is that it actually gives you control over the network stack of the web page. And by that, what I mean is any request at all that your web app makes, whether, and I don't just mean like JavaScript, Ajax type request, but any image, CSS, navigation, anything at all that involves your web page, even the core HTML of the web app, all of that can be controlled and mucked with the service worker. The primary use case for that is caching for offline support. So what that means is because you have control over the network stack, you can actually detect if a person is offline and do something. Now, what you do will depend on what your application is. You may want to load a particular page that says, "Hey, sorry, you're offline. Like here's our customer support phone number," or whatever. But preferably, you want to go to the cache. Now, browsers have had a cache since like day one. but you really haven't had programmatic control of that cache. The only real control you had was at the web server level, where at the web server, you could set a cache setting for your files, like this should cache for 24 hours or whatever. And the web server would send that as part of the headers to the browser, and the browser would see it and maybe pay attention, maybe not. It was totally up to the browser and what rules it had in play. But that cache that the browser was using, you did not have access to. Service workers now give you access to storage and that cache, and then allows you to do whatever makes sense for it. Let's turn off responsive mode here. And if we look at go into cache storage, no storage, yeah, here we go. uh, this is a DevTools look at the storage that this particular web page is using, which right now we're not doing anything. We don't have a service worker. We're not writing to uh, the cache. So right now we're doing nothing. If I were to look at my clicker game and go into storage, this particular application actually has offline support. I can go offline and this is still going to work. In fact, I won't just say that. I will go in DevTools and we will say we are offline. And I'll just reload this bad boy and completely works. There is there's I mean, you can't tell. I mean, I could tell because I have DevTools open, but everything was being run in the background for it to work. And that's because my service worker had a list of resources. Let me drink some water here. It had a list of resources in there to essentially say, I want you to cache the HTML, I want you to cache the CSS, and I want you to cache the JavaScript. And it handled that for me. And I just didn't have to worry about being offline. One of the really nice things about service workers too is that you can even say, hey, even if you're online, I'm going to give you the cache. Like I know better than you. Like I know uh, I may have a large hero image that I know is not going to change because it's a marketing campaign for a month or whatever. But I'm gonna stop you from requesting that. I'm gonna give you the cached version, and you won't even know. It'll just run quite a bit zippier. So, service workers and the network support is not just for offline. It can also just add performance in general by using the cache when necessary. And there's all kind of complex things that you can do in that regards in terms of I have some resources that I want to check the network if they're fetch it, if not go to cache. Or I have some resources where if cache, use that first and then check the network and then either replace what's in the network or update the cache for next time. You can get as crazy and as complex as you want in that based on whatever logic you have. Sue asked, "How hard is cache busting?" It's hard, but we're gonna figure we're gonna figure that out. Let me actually share that. Um, yeah, I haven't had to worry about that for this game yet, but that is something that we can do. So I spent a lot of time talking about service workers. Let's actually get into it, and I'm going to use MDN again, and we are going to go into their documentation because that's what I would do if I didn't know anything at all. And obviously, I would read all of this, but I'm not going to because I'm, live streaming. But one thing that I will point out is one of the interesting aspects of service workers is that they don't work on the first hit to the web page. That is because on the first hit to the web page, the browser is going to find the service worker and it's going to prepare it, essentially set it up. And then on the second hit to the web page, then it's going to be ready. And again, your dev tools are going to be very helpful in this. Let me actually switch to Idle Fleet, which has a service worker up and running. But you could see all kind of tools here to test. You could see version numbers, etc. So there is kind of a multi-step process in working with them. Now, I will say I kind of cheated for Idlefleet, and I used a library to make it a little bit easier for me. But we are going to try to use the docs and try to do it manually, bit by bit, before we start cheating. So, first thing that you're going to do is actually register, and that's going to be JavaScript code. It's a little bit different than the application manifest, where it was a link tag, but we're actually going to use JavaScript to say where our service worker is. And if you look on the screen here, I'll make that a little bit bigger. Not over there, this page. There we go. Even a little bit bigger. You could see the way that they do this is they do a quick little bit of checking of service worker and navigator. That's going to be the place navigator.serviceworker where that API exists. So makes sense to check for it. Although in 2024, every single browser out there is going to have it, and then it is going to register or basically tell the browser to load that service worker. So let's try this. I'm just going to steal their code and go into JavaScript. And I am going to put this at the bottom. I am not necessarily a fan of defining functions like this. So I may just do async function like that. Define it like that. Get rid of this. And move the call to that function into the init function that we already had. So just to repeat what I just did, we took some sample code from Mozdev Network that is going to handle registering our service worker. So the API, like if this is the first time you've seen it, basically where is a service worker and what is the scope? Service workers are a bit like cookies, where if you have an incredibly complex website, you may want to build a service worker for your portion of that. So if I'm Amazon.com and I am building a very advanced admin tool for Amazon.com, so let's say Amazon.com/admin, I may want my service worker to only care about that part of the website and not impact anything else. And that's where that scope comes into play. I think for most people, typically, you're going to have your service worker handle the entire site. So this next bit of code is basically going to report on what status it is in. And in theory, on our first hit, we should see it installing. And on the second one, it should be installed or active. Now we actually have to create that file. I don't want to save this just yet because it's going to auto reload. But we'll call it sw.js. And my favorite debugging method, this is sw.js. Save it. And then save this. And actually, before I even save it, I want to make sure this is open, make sure we're in the console so we are ready to go. And save it. And we could see my service worker loaded. Again, that actually came not from a script tag, but from this register command right here. All right. And like I mentioned, how there is this life cycle, this installation process, we could see that it is installing, but it's not actually active yet. And in theory, if I reload, we could see that it is active. And if we go into the application tab and look at service workers, we have one. It's activated and running. So one of you know what? I'm not going to mention that because I don't want to confuse things. I do want to make sure that I have. All right, I had network off on the other tab, not this one. All right, so we have a service worker that is doing absolutely nothing, but it is registered and available. So let's actually look at what we can do with that. Now, this is all the text talking about uh, what it's going to do. I will point out this is actually pretty important. There is no DOM access. Uh, Typically, that's never been a problem because my service worker is only doing the caching. It doesn't need to actually update the DOM. There are absolutely cases where you may want to update the DOM. So, for example, to tell the user they're offline and that you're using a cached version, they may want to know that. As far as I know, the way to do that is via the name is on the tip of my tongue. It's like a web messaging type API. Also works between frames and stuff. Web workers. I just had to dance around it a little bit before I got into it. So there is a defined way for you to handle that. Luckily, we don't have to worry about that. So we know that it's registering. Let's go into the next part where we want to populate your cache. So the install event is fired when an installation is successfully completed. The install event is generally used to populate your browser's offline caching capabilities. And for that, we're going to use another API, which is the cache API. So to do that, our service worker actually needs to listen for the install event and then handle that. Now, Sue, thank you. I think your question was perfectly planted. And also, I was a bit unaware as well. I'm a little bit rusty on this, so you're kind of seeing me remember things as I rebuild. How hard is cache busting? When you work with the cache, you actually can give it a name. In this case, you see V1. So if you want to, you could follow a version numbering type scheme to handle that. So if you were to switch to V2, it would be a completely new cache. Obviously, you need to do the code to handle that and all that. There's also some complexities with how it's going to handle on load. If you have, and actually, give me a +1 or whatever in chat. If you've ever been to a web page that loads, and then the bottom right it says a new version of this page is available. Click here to reload. That is an example of a service worker recognizing that the cache that you have is a little bit out of date, updating, and then needing a way to tell you, say, hey, you need to go and reload to get a new version. But we're going to steal right from Mozilla, and we're going to look at this. I'm going to copy this code. I know what this code is doing, and then we're going to explain it. Drop it right down here. And oh, I'm sorry, this actually goes in the service worker. All right. So we are listening for that install event. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to write to the cache. Now, what Moz did is they added a little utility method called add resources to cache. It is asynchronous. It's going to open the cache and it's going to add an array of resources to that. Now, what cache at all, this is all baked into the browser. It's actually going to do that network request and grab them and put them in. Now, our application is much simpler. We have a app.css and we have an app.js. And that is it. We don't need to cache any images. This line item here, 11, is basically recognizing the fact that when I go into my browser, I may hit just yourdomain.com slash or yourdomain.com slash index.html. That's a different request. It maps to the same thing. But this is basically saying for this URL, I want you to do that as well as index.html. I hope that made sense. Y'all let me know. Sue, can you use full URL in case you want something from another domain? Yes. Um, and I don't want to show you this because I don't want to show stuff ahead of time. But give me 1 second. You know what, Sue? I'm just gonna say yes, and not show you an example. I think Idle Fleet does Alpine JS from the full domain. I think it does. Either way, the answer is yes, you can. Now, this was the install event, which we actually missed, but it's okay. So I'm going to save this. And you know what? Let's just add a console message. And I'm okay with the tabbing being a bit off because I'm going to remove it later. Haha. I never remove it later. Sorry. Adding stuff to cache. And if we go into our app, we should see it did. It added the cache. I thought I was going to have to like refresh my cache, but it did not need that. And it actually did it. So that worked a little bit easier than I expected. I'm if I seem amiss, it's because I don't remember it working this easy. But let's take a look. And look, we have stuff. We have stuff in our cache. Uh, there we go. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that now. But we do have stuff in here. We have everything I believe we need, and in fact, so we have a cache. Now, the part we don't have yet is actually using the cache. Pretty sure about that. So if I turn off my network, say we are offline now, and reload, it should break. There we go. All right. So the reason, let's go back in line. The reason it broke is that we wrote the code to cache the stuff, but we didn't actually write the code to say, hey, when you load something, check the cache and make sure, and, use that instead. But luckily, I know our little Mozdev network is going to handle that. So the next thing that the service worker can do, I mentioned it could introspect every single network request. It does that by using an event called fetch. And in there, you can basically say, hey, check the cache. And I think that may be it. So we're going to copy this. We're going to paste this in here. Basically said every single network request respond with what matches into cache. And first thing I'm going to do is make sure I didn't break it live. And we are live. And then we're going to go offline and everyone cross your fingers. Boom. All right, I did. Now, what's happening is a great example and something that I had planned for our next part because we're almost at time. So we actually successfully made this work offline. But we're still using an API. That API is not going to work offline. But we have a way of handling that. But let me first look at my question here from Sue. Is that for link clicking and JavaScript fetches? Any network request within the application's domain. So yes, everything. So on a multi-page application, when you go to the home page to the about page via a simple hot link, the service worker can absolutely pick up on that and serve from the cache instead. So hopefully that answers your question. Um, everything. Now, I will say this very simple code uh, is a brute force instrument because it's basically saying every single thing I have return from there if there is something in the cache. And if it's outside the cache, it should fall back to a regular network request, which will fail. But again, this is brute force. So um, if I were to update something and not change the cache name here, then people would still have the older request. If you're online, you still get the cached request. Uh, we have different strategies, different things we could do to get more complex. But typically, like for my game, and I mentioned I didn't want to show the code until I was convinced it was done. Uh, for the game, it's doing that process. Just always use the cache. Now, I will show this code. See if I remember it right. SW.js. Let us not to be offline. It's not throttled. There we go. Page not found. What the heck did I call? We will look at the code for idle fleet real quick. App.js response. I called it. Oh, I spelled it out. Service worker. So I mentioned I kind of cheated for this one. I used a library from Google, and that's tiny. Let's make that big. Called Workbox that basically handled everything for me. Where in my case, it's going to check the network to make sure it's there. And if it's there, load from network. Otherwise, use cache. But this is essentially how I did caching for Idlefleet. And Sue mentioned external support. Service workers can do it. I'm doing it for Alpine, and I'm doing it for forget what I used Skypack for, but it doesn't matter. But it's there as well. But going back to our dad joke, we actually have an installable application now. If we were not offline, let's go back to normal and look at this. And in theory, we should be able to, let's clear this one more time, reload it. Manifest.json. Why did it fail to load that? You didn't fail to load. Manifest.json. Oh, so the reason it's no longer loading my application, my manifest.json, is that I wrote a service worker, and the service worker said, "Hey, everything you do, I want you to hit the cache." And guess what? I didn't cache, which was the application and manifest. So you're going to see me live. Switch this to a new cache. And we're just going to add manifest.json, cache that, reload, see what happened. And did you load this time? You did. And see what it says in the console. Oh, and thank you, Ariadne. Yeah, we are almost done because we are. This is going to be a third part for sure. Um, as we look at this even more. Oh yeah, so many errors. I love it. All right, so let's clear this and look where we are now. No throttling. Uh-huh. Yeah. So we really broke it because our API is also being blocked by the service worker. So what we need to do when we come back next time is two things. And actually, Sue, I swear, Sue, this is twice today that you've asked a question that like leads into uh what I'm gonna do. So can a page detect online, offline while on page, no navigating or page reload? Yes. And so that's what we're going to do to handle being offline and doing something else for the joke API, or we're going to put some fake content or whatever. But we can do that by detecting the network status in our app.js file. That way, we don't even try to load the joke API. We do something else, and we'll figure out something else next time. You're also seeing here that when I did my kind of brute force service worker, I screwed things up because I did not include the joke API, and I don't want to cache that. But my service worker is basically like, hey, if it's not in cache, then do nothing or fail essentially. So we need to fix that. So first things first, it is already 1 o'clock. I am going to do this for y'all, a notes.txt. And this is how we're going to remember what we need to fix next time. So first, don't stop that joke API. Center that div. Sue, if you get me that code pin, we'll get that in there. Don't stop that joke API. Fix fetch event in service worker, center that div, and detect online, offline for jokes and use backup. And what's cool about this is that we're going to use another feature, which is going to be either web storage or IndexedDB to look at essentially caching some jokes so that we can give people something when they're offline. So we have notes. We have a place to go next time. For all y'all who showed up for the last hour while I rambled on and on, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Sue, Ariadne, and everybody for the great commentary. I promise next time we won't spend 20 minutes on CSS. In fact, if Sue gets me that code pin, I'm going to do it before our next meeting. So when we show up, bottom centered and we're good to go. And we could focus on the network stuff. And that is it. Let me put you back on center here. Thank you all again so much. This has been fun. Like I said, I was a little rusty on PWA, so I love the fact that I intentionally made those errors. I love the fact that those errors happened because it was a reminder of what I went through last time I dealt with this. So thank you again. Have a good rest of your week, and I will see y'all in 2 weeks.